Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is 1 o'clock on Wednesday, February 7th. We are calling to order the regularly scheduled City Commission Budget Workshop for fiscal year 24, first quarter budget update. First and foremost, Cynthia Barber, we are going to have a wonderful day today, and it is an honor and a privilege to have you holding down the fort as acting city manager. Mr. Gold is away on business.
Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, and looking forward to today. It's going to be great. With that, I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Ms. Barber, to introduce the team and move forward.
Okay, Mayor and Commissioners, today is the first of multiple workshops that we will hold to review the FY24 budget in preparation for development of the 2025 budget. Staff is here to review the results of 2024 first quarter and to discuss any possible impacts of the legislative session. And today we have with us Mr. Robert Wiggins and his team from the resource management team. He's the director of the department, as you know. And then we have our directors here, should there be specific questions about various departments that can respond to any questions you may have.
Wonderful. Sounds great. Wiggins, I want to once again start this budget season off by thanking you and your team. You are amazing. You're nationally recognized for your excellence. You do a great job. As you know, there really is only one thing by law that we have to do on an annual basis, and that is pass a balanced budget. And I, for one, always celebrate when we do. But y'all do great. Thank you. And the floor is yours, sir.
Okay. Well, thank you for the introduction. Deputy City Manager Barber, Mayor, appointed officials, commissioners. I'll point to the left over here where the real work happens. Our fantastic team there. And then on my left here is Max Stout, our Senior Management Analyst, and Amy McLean, our other Senior Management Analyst. They put a lot of thought and preparation into how we approach fiscal year 25. We do this annually on a quarterly basis also to give you an update on where we are, to do a survey of where we think we will be at the end of the year, and then get feedback from you as we progress through the current year, so we're prepared for the fiscal year 25 budget. With this agenda item, we've got a few goals in mind. We're going to review the fiscal year 24 priorities and progress. That includes the strategic plan and budget highlights from your work and development on those areas. It's to provide a first quarter budget status. We finished October, November, December, and have booked part of January, so we've got some ideas of where we'll finish the year. We also then are making a recommendation for some budget amendments. The nice thing about meeting frequently and evaluating the budget is that we can make changes, be flexible as new opportunities come up. With fiscal year 24 as a reference point, then we'll review some early fiscal year 25 budget assumptions, and those predominantly are around revenue, which is where we kind of exist in our government organization. Also, our greatest resource, our workforce. We'll talk about some assumptions for fiscal year 25 for that workforce. And then operating expenses and investment in our infrastructure we'll also touch upon as we go through this process. We'll, of course, do the presentation, take public comment, your direction, and then recommended action there on the bottom of the page is to accept the first quarter budget update as presented. We'll ask you to approve 2 budget amendments as included in the update, and then provide any additional direction for developing the fiscal year 25 and fiscal year 25 through 29 capital budgets. With your leadership and direction, as you well know, the budget is a plan to ensure the strategic plan priorities are completed. For example, in economic development, we've invested over $500 million in Southside infrastructure and capital improvement projects. To impact poverty, we've invested in human services through the CHSP citizen process in fiscal year 24. And those organizations then leverage those dollars to serve over 65,000 individuals. We've invested in public infrastructure with $19.4 million in potable water system enhancements, resurfaced 60 miles of roads each year, and recently, as you are well aware, we're awarded $15 million grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation for the Southside Transit Center. That $15 million will then be paired with another $3 million that we had in the CIP, $1 million from the state of Florida, and then some blueprint dollars to then begin to bring that into fruition. On the public safety side, we've invested $2 million in state-of-the-art law enforcement technology, and that includes predictive analysis. These are just a few examples. You had an update in January of our progress with the strategic plan, but the linkage between that strategic plan and the budget is so important that I wanted to highlight those also. In addition to the strategic plan progress, fiscal year 24 budget was developed and achieved some targets. We added an investment of $9.5 million in TPD's budget for additional personnel, equipment, and technology. At your direction, we've continued the $7.8 million in wraparound public safety initiatives, Tempo, TIFLA, TEAM, the neighborhood safety programs, the real-time crime center. All are very important, and we expect to continue those with the investment in TPD to specifically address violent crime. We maintain existing levels of operating spending and staffing levels for core general government services, parks and recreation, public infrastructure, housing, community resilience, and CHSP. We committed to making sure we had the same level of investment in fiscal year 24 as we had done in the prior years. And lastly, but not least, we partner through CHSP in fiscal year 24 with Leon County, with citizen evaluators, and with 50 providers who administer 82 human service programs. I'd also take a second of privilege. We included in the budget agenda item a link and background on our online budgetary system. One of our strategic goals is increasing public trust and involvement, and those changes that we made to that online budget, it's our intention, as you mentioned, Mayor, to receive the award from Government Finance Officers Association, but then also have greater participation and back and forth discussion of what the budget is. Just this week, I had 3 interactions where somebody was looking something up online, asked a question in the budgetary in the online budget, and we were able to point them in the right direction. So it's a great tool for interaction when individuals can't make it to meetings. As we fulfill strategic plan targets and develop responsible budgets, we also evaluate the impact of those budgets on our community, and we do that with the municipal cost comparison. This should be a familiar chart. We do this on an annual basis. In this past year, though, there were changes in our property tax rates, the 4.45 mills that we implemented. So we were really curious to see where we would land. I'm proud to say that Tallahassee and Lakeland have the lowest living cost among the 12 cities surveyed. And I'll point out that residents in other cities pay an average of 35% more for these services than Tallahassee, and up to 80% higher if you go to the top of the bar chart. We look at Hollywood, West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, Gainesville, Orlando, often communities that we are compared to. We look at our city property tax bill. We look at our electric bill with a franchise fee and a solid waste bill, fire services fee, water bill, sewer bill, and the stormwater bill. These 11 other municipal service providers, when we look at them from a residential property perspective, and those 6 municipal services that are provided. Tallahassee has the 3rd lowest millage rate in comparison of the other municipalities. As we've discussed before, we've got nearly 47% of our properties that are not on the tax roll. So it's very important not only to look at property taxes, but then all the municipal services that we provide and make sure that they're affordable. We also have the largest territory among the 12 entities that we compare amongst ourselves. Those utility costs, although not apparent as you look at them at a stacked bar chart, we've got the third lowest utility costs. And again, I think that demonstrates the value of having publicly owned utilities. Not just from a residential perspective, but in addition to property owners, we look to make sure that we're a successful place for businesses to operate. And on the next chart, we show that the small business commercial municipal cost comparison evaluates what the varying types of businesses pay in taxes for essential services. We look at a office and retail environment. We look at a restaurant, which is pictured here. We also then look at personal services, such as a barber shop, to get an idea of what they are paying for city municipal services. Very familiar in that we're looking at the same 6 services, the 12 total communities. And while we also measure and evaluate, there's also feedback by the media, and I've mentioned that in the bullet above, that we were recently cited as one of the 7 safest and cheapest cities to live in Florida by Go Banking, and one of the best places to live in Florida by Forbes. And we think each of those feedback loops that we have in place communicates that we're being responsible in achieving our strategic plan, but also then developing our budget.
Sure, Mr. Mayor Pro
Robert,
Tem.
could you, again, is the evaluation of us being the cheapest, one of the cheapest cities, does that include in that evaluation the property tax increase that we are looking at this point? Is that included in that evaluation?
Yeah, so
Okay.
GoBankingRates.com, it published this. They used online available information. This was published in the last, let's see, I don't have the date of the publication.
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago.
Okay.
So it does take into consideration the 4.45 mills that we implemented.
And we are among the bottom 2 in terms of cost.
Cost of service for
Right.
our utilities, property taxes.
And we are the only municipality that does not have a business tax out of the top, out of the 12 comparable. That was long before our time. I mean, we got rid, as a community, we got rid of the business tax at the city and the county, over a decade ago, correct?
Exactly.
So we do not collect business tax receipts.
Yeah, and in those 2 considerations, those 2 media, they looked at the diverse population, affordable housing, lower crime rate. And again, we've addressed the recognition that we need to pay attention to violent crime. And then in the Forbes study, they looked at city size, crime rate, diversity, unemployment rate, and cost of living. They also considered outdoor activities, public transit, and healthcare access.
And Mr. Mayor and Robert, for those who don't have access to this document, I will just read it into your hearing. This little what they say about Tallahassee. It says, as Florida's capital, Tallahassee offers a unique blend of collegiate energy and political buzz. The city has a diverse population, affordable housing, and a lower crime rate compared to other metropolitan areas in the state. And it lists the other cities where they say that safety and affordability meets. So, I don't know if anybody was reached to provide this information to them, but they apparently came to this on their own. And so I just wanted to put that out there for those who may not have access to the article, because it was sent to me as well a couple of weeks ago by somebody. So we ain't doing too bad.
Interesting enough, I think it was actually written by AI. So our computer overlords.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't say it was written by. It says that it has an author cited, and that person is an AI editor. Story by Sean Fisher, who is an AI editor, not an AI author. So I would just make sure we get that straight.
All right, Robert, we can move on.
As we keep the strategic plan in mind, look at the fiscal year 24 budget targets, we look at cost impacts to the community. We also evaluate the status of our budget during the fiscal year and make adjustments and plans for the future. This is a familiar overview that you're seeing here. It's a table that shows each of our 14 operating funds. We have particular key drivers that we look at. We've provided a description of each fund And then there are actions to take as we go through the fiscal year to make sure that we're keeping current and constant with electric sales, water consumption, fire services fees, each of the enterprise funds, enplanements at the airport. We want to make sure that our budget is active and current and reflects the environment that we're looking at. The 14 operating funds, when we look at year end, we expect them to be balanced. But as you see, we have identified a few key funds to monitor. If you're looking at the symbols that we've included, the color coding indicates the fund status of green, which was just expected to finish within budget. Yellow, we've identified a few funds that needs monitoring. And then if we were asking you to take immediate action at the meeting so that we could make changes to the budget to balance at the year end, we would identify those with a red symbol.
Mayor.
Commissioner Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just a clarifying question, those that are in the yellow, specifically the reason we're monitoring them is because of action that the legislature may take, or are there other reasons above and beyond that?
In water and sewer, that is specifically why we put the water and sewer utility in yellow, is to monitor the activities of the legislature and how they may impact our surcharges. It's still early in the process. We don't know the absolute impact, but it also then informs our decision in fiscal year 25 that part of our process is to go through a reaffirmation of our rates in water and sewer. Star Metro is a slightly different situation. We've seen the growth over the pandemic, and I hate to continue to harken back to the pandemic, but we saw the growth in dial-a-ride services. And we know that fixed routes is where some of the efficiencies and economies are. And so Star Metro is involved in seeing how they can shift that focus from the dial-a-ride activities back to the fixed route activities. And we'll be doing that this year. It's even more important as we then venture into the Southside Transit Center, the building of that, because again, that's going to be a facility that features those fixed routes.
Thank you.
All right, Robert, moving forward.
I'll mention that in-depth details for each fund are included in attachment A of the agenda, and we'd be glad to answer any questions about those 14 funds. With that focus on those 14 funds and where we are in fiscal year 24, we can continuously evaluate and report, but we can also then adapt. And we've identified 2 capital budget amendments that we're recommending. One is very familiar in that you took action to accept a grant in order to budget the matching funds. We're asking that the Tom Brown Park mountain bike trail renovation, their budget be amended by $80,000 to add the match to those grant funds that we're receiving, the $320,000. And then another opportunity that we have that staff believes we will be successful with if we budget is to match $500,000 for the Forest Meadows artificial turf field project. And that project completion, we made it conditional based on getting the money, but we want to make the 100% match for a total project of $1 million. As mentioned by the commissioners, and as you are very well aware, it's also recognized in the first quarter update. There's a continuation on throttling our capacity to provide community expected services. That emerging trend in the legislature impacts our capability for a millage rate increase or change, or exemption on homesteads, which impacts our property taxes. And then there's also discussion of limiting general fund transfers from utilities and or phasing out surcharges from water and sewer utilities. So the list of those legislative issues are here. I know that you're being provided an update to those legislative activities. That'll be detailed in the evening's workshop agenda materials. But I wanted to acknowledge those as we go through the budget process that we're also connecting to what those impacts may be. Those impacts, I think, are most visibly seen when we talk about our general fund. I've got two graphics here. One is where our general fund revenues, our predominant source of revenues comes from. It's $66.1 million in ad valorem taxes and $55 million in general fund and contributions from the utilities. These revenues fund critical services like public safety, parks and recreation, public works, and community resilience. And on the right-hand side, you see in the chart that TPD itself is a $76 million budget. Parks and recreation is a $29 million budget. Our roads and sidewalks from the general fund itself is a $20 million operation. That doesn't include necessarily sales tax or gas tax investment. And then housing, of course, is a priority. So that trend that's emerging is of concern, and it's something we want to make ourselves aware of and be prepared for as we enter fiscal year 25, should any of the legislation pass. I'll hearken back to our fiscal year 24 budget development. And
Robert, let me jump in real quick. Let's go back to this. This is important to talk about. Heaven forbid a piece of legislation passes restricting our ability for the utility transfer. Have we been able to calculate what would be the millage increase that would be required to pass in order to maintain the exact same level of service on the departments that receive general funding revenue?
You know, we've got a rough idea of what that would be. It's definitely in the millions of dollars. And if you'll recall, when we passed our property tax move from 4.1 mils to 4.45 mils, that increased our budget by $9.5 million to invest in police.
Right.
So every tenth of a mil would be about $3 million. And so
Every tenth of a mil is the equivalent of about $3 million.
Yes.
But you're talking about, heaven forbid, at the worst case scenario, if we weren't allowed to transfer anything from the utilities, a dark blue and black, what is that?
$55 million.
$55 million. So we're talking about literally doubling the millage rate, if not more. And by law, we can't do that, though, can we? We can't increase the millage rate that much in 1 year, correct?
Well, no, we could not.
No, we couldn't. So like in a doomsday scenario, if the transfer was not available to maintain the quality of life and the low tax base, quite frankly, and the low electric rates, then the city would be placed in a scenario that, quite frankly, by law, we could not even address.
Correct.
Happy times. All right, Robert, keep going.
And I'll mention the levels of fairness and equity that we've been able to maintain in our budget is critical. We've got
Right.
Residential and commercial property owners to consider, got homestead and non-homesteaded.
Correct.
On and off the property tax rolls. And so, yeah, that general fund transfer is an equivalent of what you see in many communities that have private entities that provide their utility services.
Right.
Mayor?
Sure.
Also, in my briefing yesterday with city manager and deputy city manager and Dr. Whitley, we also talked about the homestead exemption bill that's going pretty good over across the street. It could also have some impact on us as well. So he's right. Happy time.
Right.
Okay.
Now, in all fairness, in this particular legislative session, the legislation that was filed, correct me if I'm wrong, does not restrict 100% transfer. And so that was not the scenario that's on the table. And I think it's important that we recognize that. Nonetheless, the legislation that was proposed would have a significant impact on the city of Tallahassee. All right, Robert, keep moving forward, please.
Always one to deliver the cheerful news. I mentioned hearkening back to some of the systems that we have in place. I mentioned these mostly because, as inflationary pressures, as we had to address inflationary pressures, there were certain actions that we could take to, absorb those cost increases while providing the same capacity for services. those aren't endless. These were efforts that were developed in =23, continued in '24. We continue to look for these opportunities, but there's only so long that we, could extend the life of a city vehicle and fleet. The replenishing of the special insurance reserve over 4 years, that was a one-time action to help us balance the budget. We will continue to make sure that we're recovering disaster expenditures through FEMA public assistance so that we're made whole after we expend our resources on those disasters. And then, of course, we plan and compete and maximize our grant opportunities. The very two examples that we're asking you to amend the capital budget, but also very visible is the Southside Transit Center, the federal awards to the airport. So those, of course, help us expand the resources that we have. We continue to pursue those, but they're not an absolute way to close a budget gap. With that environment, we have developed some initial budget assumptions, and I've listed a few here for discussion. So with the strategic plan in mind, with the fiscal year '24 budget analysis in mind, these assumptions center around revenues, expenditures for our workforce, and then operating and investment expenditures. Probably the most important one that we understand is that we're maintaining the current millage rate of 4.45 mils as we enter fiscal year '25. The other aspect of as we go through the budget development is that water, sewer, and stormwater utilities are scheduled for rate study review. And then we also review user fees to ensure equitable cost recovery. Of course, we've got policies in place so that youth and senior services are accommodated within our general fund budget. But where there are specific uses of our service, then we don't want to pass that cost on to others. And so we review those user fee studies every year. So that's from a revenue perspective. From an expenditure perspective, probably the most important one is as our efficiency and our effectiveness and our personnel are most critical as a resource. We have made the assumption that in order to attract and develop and support our talent, we will budget a raise. What that amount is still to be analyzed and evaluated. There's still a lot of information from the legislature, from the property appraiser, from state revenue sharing sources that we have to evaluate before we would feel comfortable making a recommendation. Of course, one of our tenets is also fully funding our pension plans. We've been able to absorb healthcare cost increases, and we are expecting to do that again this year. From an expenditure perspective, we know that maintaining our systems, maintaining our facilities, maintaining our utilities is important. And so our fiscal year '25 through '29 CIP investment will maintain those financial performance metrics, but we will use any available cash balances. We'll explore debt financing, and then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, use grants and local agencies as funding sources for a capital budget. We're assuming that our operating costs in our general fund will be kept at the same level as last year. That's ever a challenge because as we increase salaries, then those, the revenues will cover those salary changes, but we have to hold the line on operating expenses. What we do have in place is consumer price index changes for our utilities, and so their operating expenses for materials and contract services can change over time as the market changes. And then I'll mention that we'll continue to invest over $4 million in local human service needs, as well as maintaining our robust capital plan to improve infrastructure. Most notably in that infrastructure are plans for the TPD headquarters, for the fire station 17, and then the Northeast Senior Center and other roadways. So with those assumptions, looking ahead on the calendar, we have a number of workshops to continue this discussion as we know better information. In April, June, and then September, we'll have workshops. We also then expect in June and July to get better information from the state and from our property appraiser. We are early in the budget process, but it's worthwhile talking about the strategic plan, the budget development in '24, what the expectations are in '25, and then hearing your thoughts and public's ideas on the fiscal year '25 budget. With that, I'll entertain any initial questions and/or direct it back to
Great.
you.
Thank you. Ms. Barber, any final comments before we take public comment?
No, that concludes our formal presentation, and we're available for those questions. And
Excellent. Great. So could we put the slide up? Mr. Cook, I'm coming to you in just a second for public comment. Can we put the slide up of the budget amendments to be considered tonight, just so that we're all on the same plan? Excellent. Mr. Cook, do we have any public comment on the budget, the workshop?
Mayor, I have one speaker at this time. That is Stanley Sims.
Okay.
Microphone is right here to my right. And 3 minutes, please give us your name and address.
Name and address for the record, please.
Mr. Mayor, can I get some media assistance, please?
Sure. What are you looking for in particular?
I think the camera's
For the
on.
camera?
Yeah, and usually when you all have white citizens, come up here and.
Do we have anybody that can
Can't
help
see
out
it.
with the camera?
The guy can
coming?
come here and
Okay.
focus it in. You usually let them come and operate it.
It's up on the screen.
It's up on the screen.
You can't see it.
Yes, you can.
Yeah, you can.
I can't see it.
Okay.
Can they focus this down?
There it is.
They can make it where you can see it. I don't know why it's difficult. Can you read that? I can't read.
Your name and address for the
Focus it
record,
in a little
please.
bit more for me, please.
Please go ahead and begin your comments.
My name is Stanley Sims. I'm at 1320 Avondale Way. I'm the father of a new fireman, City Commissioner Diane Williams-Cox. Wow. That's how the firemen feel. 20 rounds, 22 rounds, 23 rounds of negotiations. And I was just sitting there, and we were boasting about all of those cities that we were cheaper than. Is that because maybe we're not paying our employees? I have to ask that question, Curtis. I know that but it is. Look, I have firsthand experience as a father of a firefighter. My 23-year-old son witnessed a suicide murder. That's a lot for a young man to take on. That's his career, he chose that. I think about my son every time I see that truck roll down. It's different now. Don't belittle my son's profession. Then if one happens, every one of you would be at the funeral. Let's give them their flowers while they live. Let's give them a pay that is fair, equitable to these other cities we brag about. Gaston County is beating us and paying our firefighters? Wakulla? But our lobbyist tells us in our first budget workshop meeting that these cities look to us. I hope they don't follow us with how we pay our firefighters.
You're at about 20 seconds.
People ask me all the time, why are they dogging the firemen? I said because the firemen chose to operate in their democracy and not be manhandled and told who to endorse for mayor
You're at 3
and who
minutes.
not to.
Thank you very much for your comment.
Thank you.
Time is up. Any other public comment?
Yes, Mayor, I have an additional speaker, Dot Inman Johnson.
All right.
Good afternoon. I noticed on your slide that the recommendation is to keep the millage rate at 4.4. And I need to know if staff has figured into what the current budget proposal is, any impacts from the charter review that is projected to take place. Because if the number of seats are expanded on the city commission, that would have a budget impact. If the salaries are increased to the amount of the county commissioners, that would have a budget impact. And there are several other proposals that are on the table that the Charter Review Committee is looking at that will impact the budget next year, and I'm sure there are other things. So I just want to make sure all of the proposals for next year are being taken into consideration when structuring the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. And Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, obviously any formal recommendations that come from the Charter Review Commission that if the city decides to put it on the ballot would be included and analyzed in the budget, and that's part of the process moving forward with the other workshops that we have. But you will include that, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
And Mr. Mayor,
Sure.
if I may also ask a clarifying question, any of that would not come to fruition anyway until after the voters have had an opportunity to vote in November, which will be in the next fiscal year, not this current fiscal year. And as I understand it, this budget workshop is regarding this current fiscal year and where we are through September 30th, correct? And so perhaps after the voters have had their say, we could then be looking at what that impact would be. Because other than that, until the voters have had a say, we don't know what we would be dealing with.
I think that is correct. We would have to see what the language of the amendments were, and I think we would evaluate whether, if they were adopted, what impact it would have, and then we would take the opportunity during a fiscal year 25 quarterly update to make any changes that were necessary as a result of that, if the direction was immediate.
Right, but today's budget workshop is regarding where we stand in the current budget and amendments that we are aware that needs to take place in this current budget.
All right, Commissioner Porter.
Oh, just a clarifying question. We are also talking about fiscal year 25 today, are we not?
We are.
Okay.
But, November of 24 would be the beginning of fiscal
okay.
year 25, and so any action, we wouldn't necessarily know what to adopt in September until we saw the language of the amendment.
We'll go, all right. We have no other public comment. Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I just want to commend the budget office staff, the work that they do. In the 10 years that I've been here, I think if not all of you, most of you have served in those capacities or similar capacity. I can't think of a year where we didn't have, of course, full faith and confidence in the information that you've brought to us. Regardless of whether it was AI or an author, the budget speaks for itself in terms of us when we compare ourselves to other municipalities. That's what is that our community needs to know, that when we're compared to similarly sized cities, that we are among the lowest in terms of cost for services. And that has been the case since I've been here. Even through the tough times of COVID, we still maintain that. And again, it was largely due to the budget staff that we have and them putting that sharpened pencil, Commissioner Cox, to paper. And so I, again, just want to commend them for the work that they've done and say, you know, I've been in Tallahassee for 50 years, and I can't imagine another city that I would want to live that provides the kinds of services and the quality of services that we enjoy in this community for what we pay for those services, as evidenced by what we've got in this report. So again, thank you all.
Is that a motion to accept the report and for the two budget amendments?
That is a motion for that
Second that.
purpose.
I second it.
There's a motion on the table by the Mayor Pro Tem, seconded by Commissioner Williams-Cox. For the comment, Commissioner Matlow.
Yeah, quite a few things. I wanted to start with the budget assumptions for June and July. Is that when we will know the tax increase or the amount of extra money that will be available versus the prior year?
We will know property values in preliminary property values in June, and then final property values in July.
And so we'd have an indication of what a rollback rate would be in June or July. I want to talk about, or just ask about a couple of projects. The Lake Bradford fire station. Which year do we anticipate that?
Robert, what's Cynthia?
2026 is there,
Yes.
we would
That's what I've
anticipate.
read.
Okay. And are we anticipating hiring staff to be able to serve that station next year or in opening?
We've been in conversations with the fire chief. He has the availability of funds and the capacity in the fire services fee to hire those individuals. He will make that decision on when that's happening, but the budget is available.
Okay. On the police station at Northwood, do we know the total cost of the police station?
No, the design is not complete, so at this time, we don't have that. We reported that during the retreat, that we anticipate that to be sometime around June before the design is complete, and then you still have to get the bids. Our contractor, we would have to have bids on
Go
the
through the
project
process,
in order
right.
to know, be able to give you that cost.
Do we have a budget projection of the size, how high that cost may be? We're having budget conversations now and looking at the threats from the legislature. If we do take out bonds, it will be, the responsibility to repay that. And my concern is we're $20 million into the project. We don't know how much the project costs. And that's unlike any other project that I've seen us do in local government. Are we building a $40 million police station? Are we building a $100 million police station? What makes sense to me budget-wise is you set the number of what we're willing to spend on a facility, and then you design it for that. It seems like we're waiting for a design to tell us what we're going to build. And we've been talking about this for 6 years, and we still don't have the information. We used to have a line item in our CIP for $40 million for a police station. We're halfway through that, and we haven't built any walls yet. So I'm just registering my concern, and hopefully by the next budget hearing, we really have a real clear picture of what that facility is going to cost. Secondly, or thirdly, I guess, is just overall priorities of mine during this budget cycle. And I don't imagine we'll agree on all of them, but I hope we can find some common ground on some of these. Baseline neighborhood sidewalks, bike pedestrian facilities. I think we've been doing a good job over the years. We'll continue that as a top priority. I think we need to raise the minimum wage for all city employees, part-time or not, to $16 an hour. We need to, as we go into the next round of firefighter negotiations, we need to be looking at our fire services. How are we going to fund that? We've all recognized going forward, we're going to be looking for a much better contract. We've been told the 3-year negotiations, we really look to make sure we are one of the top paid departments in the state. I think we have to start budgeting for that now before the conversations continue. I think this year we need to increase funding to CHSP and nonprofits. Particularly, I've heard concerns from nursing home facilities in our city, particularly ones that accept Medicaid, and how we can make sure those continue to be operated. We had a conversation last year about childcare for city employees. I'm not sure if it could be the whole city at a time, but how can we start that type of program for city employees to provide childcare. We'll talk about it tonight, but in-kind services from Parks and Rec, is our budget line item for Parks and Rec in-kind services high enough for what the commission continues to ask? And then I'm a big fan of making any type of changes budget neutral. So last year I proposed $5 million in cuts to the city budget, and I'll continue to propose them this year. I think we don't need a strategic innovation department. That's not something you see in municipalities across the country. I think we need to limit pay increases for top executive management, because what we're seeing is a compounding effect. When we do 5% across the board every year, but you make $200,000, the difference between our lowest paid workers and our highest paid workers is becoming astronomical. And then I think we need to make cuts to non-essential government services. That's the sponsorships, the advertising, all these things that don't really speak to a government function. So I'll put all these thoughts into writing and bring them to the next meeting, but I just wanted to say these are things I'd be interested in.
All right, other comments? Commissioner Porter?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a couple of questions. For the bicentennial, do we have a budget for bicentennial events? I know a bicentennial park there's work going on with that. Do we have, I don't know if we've had that conversation directly, so I'm just wondering if, when we will, or if we have a figure in mind, if that's something we're thinking about.
There is no line item for a bicentennial park. That has not even been brought before this commission for consideration. That will be a conversation that will take place.
Okay. And for the new strategic plan, the update to the strategic plan, can someone remind me when, because I asked this during the retreat, but I was on virtually, when that first workshop meeting will happen? What I'm getting at is, based on that, obviously, there might be changes to the budget that will inform the budget, and I'm wondering how we're incorporating that and kind of what the timeline for that is going to be.
Kristen, you want to respond to the timeline for that?
Yeah, we can take a look at the timing of that. What I do know is that in the first round, in the first plan, our earliest workshops were probably in late spring. And then we had maybe 2 more before the November adoption. So we've been planning for that cadence and timing of meetings, and we can take a look to make sure that the 2 are coordinated in terms of looking at your strategic direction and how it would impact next year's budget.
Thank you. And of course, I don't want to rush the strategic plan unnecessarily. I'm just curious, I want to keep that in mind. As far as CHSP funding, I know that the county had a workshop on human services in November of last year, and at their last meeting, I believe the county directed their staff to work with the city, with CHSP, and with the Children's Services Council to create a process that essentially, would potentially replicate the current CHSP funding structure and categories. Is that, I don't think, we haven't had that conversation at a meeting with the city. Is that something that we are aware of and internally thinking through? It's a conversation we need to have, but I'm wondering, because, I found this out just watching the county meeting, so I'm just wondering if you have any input on that.
From a budget perspective, our approach is that whatever decisions are made within departmental budgets, then we will follow that and work to make sure that those are represented in the budget. Housing and Community Relations is directly involved with that CHSP process, and whatever they communicate to us, then we'll represent that in the budget.
Assistant City Manager Abena Otentaya can speak to any coordination in the process thus far.
Ms. Ojitaya, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
I won't be here too long. Yes, our staff is actively engaged with the county. We try to maintain a really good working relationship and awareness of what's happening there. So we are following their conversation. The county did have their own separate discussion about how they wanted to move forward. They had, I believe, 2 or 3 discussions. At the last one, they decided to not make any change to the CHSP process. As you know, is a joint endeavor. So no changes to the categories of the funding, but they did want to continue the relationship that has been established between the city, county, and the CSC. We have an MOU that has come before you all that specifies that we will coordinate, we will share information, we'll track the performance of agencies and see where there might be some synergies. One of the things they also highlighted was that this spring, the CSC will be making their own announcements about a new round of funding. And so they wanted to observe what that outcome would be. So depending on the program areas, the categories that they focus on, that could be instructive as well for us to decide how we move forward. The specific, I think, comment you bring up was a discussion around whether the CSC wants to create a similar process like CHSP. Of course, the county understands that they couldn't direct the CSC to make that. And so the language was to continue the conversation to see where they go and how we might adapt the CHSP process. But those conversations are still ongoing. Our team in Human Service, of course, is actively engaged.
Okay, thank you. And I also would support, I want to continue having that conversation on, considering increasing our CHSP funding support where it's needed. I would love to have participated in that workshop. I don't know why the city did not participate in that workshop despite being invited. That's a conversation I would love to have before we conclude our budget, as we go through this budget process, because I think that that's something that is a priority for me. It's a priority it's what I hear about when I'm getting emails from residents and when I speak to those who are working in human services. Another question about the funding request made by the sheriff and the council on the status of men and boys. We made a commitment. I don't really know where they are at. I haven't heard an update from them, but have we budgeted? Do we plan on budgeting? I mean, this is a question as much from my colleagues as staff. We did not budget, or we did not fulfill the entirety of their request. They came to us with a specific figure. We diverted funds, but we have not committed to the entirety of their request from the city. So I'm wondering if that's something we're planning on having a conversation about.
Yes, Commissioner, I received a request from the Sheriff Department to come and do a presentation to provide an update. So we anticipate that in March. And,
okay, great.
Is this scheduled? Have they asked for the
Commissioner
first
Porter,
or
if
second
you recall,
meeting?
I brought that up at the
March 22nd.
retreat.
Okay, thank you.
That we needed an update and to invite Mr. King, and I have also since talked to Mr. King to personally come and provide an update to the city commission. But it was,
They're going to do it on the 22nd.
Yeah.
The second meeting in March.
that's right. So we
Okay,
look forward to
thank
having
you.
them back.
Okay, thank you. And then as far as just some general comments about some priorities of mine and things I'd like to see us discuss, we've gotten a lot of, correspondence, about just code enforcement issues and whether that's an area that needs more support. Where we've made a lot of strides with supporting low and extremely low income housing, but if that's something we want to commit more funding to, I'm really interested in, we provide support to Legal Services of North Florida who do incredible work, and along those lines, whether we would want to consider funding something like a right to counsel program. I mean, it's astounding if you look at the numbers. The eviction rates, it's something like you are, 80% less likely to be evicted if you have counsel supporting you and working through that process with you. That's something that I'm interested in discussing. I also support raising the minimum wage to all employees to $16 an hour, and exploring some of the ideas that some of my colleagues have raised, like childcare, like continuing the infrastructure investments we're making in pedestrian safety, cyclist safety, all of those things I would agree with and would want further conversation about. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Excellent. Any further comment? Well, Robert, once again, I want to thank you for the hard work. We have a motion on the table that will take action in a second. I want to thank the entire Call Y'all the Dream team. Y'all do amazing work, and this begins the journey preparing for the next fiscal year. I'm encouraged to hear comments about collaboration and moving forward and putting together a budget that we can all agree upon. I will go ahead and state on the record that wiping out entire departments and targeting senior staff is not a pathway to success in my mind, but I look forward to having the continued conversation. With that, all those in favor of the motion on the table signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Passes unanimously 5-0. We stand adjourned. We will be back at 3 o'clock for the regularly scheduled City Commission meeting.